heard you question my stability. You think I'll fall just like a guillotine.
I was told he was dead.
I'm here to stay. Walk away.
I don't believe it.
The storm is coming, so you better start running.
Does the mafia boss know where my brother is?
Control, feel it in my bones. I'm coming for the, coming for the. I'm coming for the throne.
A cab driver noticed that his passenger had a little too much to drink. Did he want to relax after a hard night out? But the man noted to himself that he was terribly dizzy. But there was no way he could pass out now. His eyes were swimming with images. God, it was so hard. And then his head rested against the door. And the cab driver had already thought of something. The car stopped at an abandoned building, and the man had an accomplice. They wanted to assess the girl's figure. The temptation was so great that when she woke up, they did not resist. The main thing was that the girl should not twitch. The men wanted, though, were sure they would have a great time. The stranger suggested they stop there. What did she mumble? Stop. Girls like that usually screamed the loudest. Well, then there was no time to lose. Except she didn't agree. The main character warned me. Luckily, the police arrived. And the girl, whose clothes were stained with blood, happily greeted the lieutenant. He knew it would end like this. Everyone knew her as Sergeant Hana Lee. She was the best counter-terrorist agent. Before joining PMC, the girl had worked in the Special Forces unit. She hadn't failed a single mission. One could only imagine how tough Hana Lee was. She also had a brother who worked in intelligence. That kind of kinship makes her even cooler. What a family. But what was that girl doing in Korea? What such a legend really joined them? The two men's conversation was interrupted by the shouts of the lieutenant, who forbade the girl to disarm anyone in the worst possible way. But these criminals were far from being at their best. Hana Lee, on the other hand, blamed it on self-defense on pure reflexes. Although she might have overdone it, the girl dumped all the evidence and explained that the men threatened her with a cold weapon. So it could be considered attempted murder with robbery. If you also record the condition of the heroine, then you can add intimidation on top. She was covered in blood from head to toe. Suddenly, the girl ordered the lieutenant to undress. Why did she need his clothes? But the man couldn't let her hang around like that, could he? Actually, he should have offered it to her himself. Good job. If it wasn't for Hana Lee, the criminals would have gotten away with it. But praise is worthless. The lieutenant should have repaid the favor, and she was really experienced. The man got a promotion when these two are behind bars. He didn't have a choice. Besides, her involvement in this operation had to be kept secret. The lieutenant asked her how Dewey Lee was doing. The guy was traveling now. Spent 2 months in the States, then went to Spain. I think he was going to Cambodia. He'd been sent on a real mission. He was really smart. Suddenly, the girl got a call. It was Cambodia's number. Someone on the other side said hello to Mr. Dewey Lee's sister. The person was calling from National Security and Intelligence. What did they talk about? Her brother was killed in the last operation, and darkness fell. Hana Lee had been talking for far too long. Even the lieutenant was getting tired of waiting, but now she'd moved on to yelling and insults. Really, the girl was afraid it would turn out to be true. It didn't make any sense. A shiver ran through her body. How could this happen to Dewey Lee? She couldn't believe it. Her body gave up and collapsed on the cold ground. Tears began to wash away the blood on her face, and a co-worker ran up and grabbed Hana Lee by the shoulders. It was as if she was stunned and blinded at the same time. It must be just a nightmare. That baby whimpering could be heard even in the night. A little boy sobbing because his fault, his big sister had taken him away. She just wanted to protect him. Dewey Lee didn't do anything wrong back then. His body always reacted badly to food. It was only wrong of the head mistress to make him eat it. Dewey Lee took his sister's hand and promised that when he grew up, he would make sure that no one would ever hurt Hana Lee again. The boy made a promise to protect her. So all she had to do was wait. The main character woke up from this long nightmare. Dewey Lee was the only reason why the girl returned to Korea. Suddenly, her attention fell on a sound. Where was that noise coming from? It seemed to be coming from downstairs. Under the bed. Hana Lee discovered a secret passage that contained a phone. It was Dewey Lee calling. What's going on? The signal was too weak, and the call could be dropped at any second. The girl asked for his location, but the younger brother only replied that Renti was dangerous. She had to do something. Hana Lee tried to track his location, but the sound disappeared. Dewey Lee's cough disappeared, and there was calm. The agency said he was dead, but the brother was still alive. He was most likely calling her from a device that couldn't be traced or tapped, which means Dewey Lee was cornered. Hana Lee promptly made the decision to go to Cambodia. Otherwise, she might have lost Dewey Lee forever. On the island of Sicily in Italy, a certain man discovered that his goods had been stolen. It was Giulio Parenti, the Sicilian mafia head, who was responsible for him. As it turned out, it was Niccolo, who was immobilized on the spot. Giulio Parenti couldn't leave it like that, could he? The man gave the order to start packing because they're moving out. There's a good chance they were already waiting for them in Cambodia. A certain someone expressed words of regret to Hana Lee, saying that he should have taken better care of Dewey Lee. The girl, on the other hand, asked Tae-jun to stop crying and instead answer her. Where was her little brother's body located? Unfortunately, the man didn't know and couldn't even find it. The reason was because a bomb had exploded there. Apparently, Dewey Lee had stolen something that belonged to the mafia. They tried to kill him by sending a suicide bomber with a bomb. This must be a joke. Hana Lee instructed Tae-jun to wait for her at the airport because she was going to find the body herself. More accurately, she was going to find her brother alive. It was terribly hot in Cambodia. Tae-jun didn't show up, even though he had promised to drop by the office for just 1 minute. Here he comes. The shaggy-haired man called a tuk-tuk. He was Dewey Lee's closest colleague, and an employee of the National Security and Intelligence Service. When the girl peppered him with questions about his car and job, Tae-jun quickly changed the subject. It seems that Hana Lee suspected something after all. She wanted the coordinates of the place where Dewey Lee was last seen. Why, it was 75 kilometers north of here. Some village, except a man tried to talk Hana Lee out of it. If the intelligence people found out about it, it wouldn't end well for her. She did not care, because the protagonist translated the conversation and asked the calculation of information about the activities of her younger brother. She wished to know the purpose of the last operation, who Dewey Lee had interacted with, what clothes and shoes he was wearing. She was curious about when the bomb exploded and Dewey Lee's means of transportation. In a word, everything. Now that Hana Lee was threatening him. Well, Tae-jun did not confront her, but that was the last time he would help her. In Dewey Lee's apartment, the girl looked around carefully. Everything was cleaned up, bottles arranged neatly in rows. But no matter how much she thought about it, she couldn't imagine her younger brother dying like this. Dewey Lee and Tae-jun were tracking new types of illegal substances. They were trying to track down the Italian mafia that was distributing them. At one point, the guy lost contact with Dewey Lee right before they were supposed to meet at the location where the illegal substances were stored. Tae-jun went to see what was going on. It looked like he was going to act on his own. But Tae-jun couldn't imagine that Dewey Lee was somehow involved with the mafia. The girl didn't know if she could trust those words. Perhaps Tae-jun had reported Hana Lee to his superiors long ago, and she should have stayed away from him from now on. But first, she had to get as much useful information as possible. Even in this house, Hana Lee knew to be careful how she behaved. For starters, it was possible to minimize the possibility of eavesdropping. Dewey Lee had always been obsessed with order. Whoever was here knew that for sure, but he had clearly missed the labels on the drinks, just like he had missed the hangers. Hana Lee needed to find something that her brother had left behind. There had to be something here. Could it be this? As it turned out, when the guys were talking about this hidden projector, instead of a lamp, it had a small projection device built into it. When turned on, it looked like a normal lamp. But if you pressed this button inside, when did Dewey Lee do this? After all, now Big Sister had no other choice. She didn't plan on contacting him again. The man was happy to talk to one again. So why had she dialed him? What was the reason? The man already knew that the protagonist was in Cambodia. But why? Was he following her? The girl asked him for a favor. Just a favor. find information on a man who had ties to the mafia, Giulio Parenti. Maybe she needed something else. Sure enough, the girl felt no shyness and asked for a weapon. Valentine's Day meant death. That's far from romantic. And that's where they met the first one. Everyone was happy to see Hana Lee, as was the head of Valentine's Day, Logan. The girl shared information with him regarding her brother and his assignment, except that she wasn't completely sure of its veracity, because Parenti wasn't the type to let live or take prisoners. There were a few other people here who might have had something to do with it, but one of them turned out to be Logan's client, so the man refused to say anything. Their conversation was interrupted by someone else. Eunseong Yoo? Eunseong Yoo is also excited to meet Hana Lee, and it was mutual. The man hoped to be useful during his stay in Cambodia. It's always nice to meet a fellow countryman. And if the guy really wanted to help her, the protagonist would gladly accept his offer. Taejoon was looking for Hana Lee. He couldn't even contact her. Could it be that something was wrong? The guy freaked out from not being allowed to hang around like that? This isn't a safe place. Hana Lee, on the other hand, ignored him and quickly rushed away because of the heat. He mumbled that if the girl needed to go somewhere, it would be best if she called him. Something could happen to her while she was alone. And he was right. The main character didn't know much, except that she was advising Taejoon to make the right decision. The information he gave her had so many gaps, especially the surveillance video. Didn't he himself think that something was wrong? With this scene that the video editor had captured, Dewey Lee entered the building where the bandits were, and then he was pulled back out before the bomb went off. Why would they shine their brother's face on camera if they were going to short him? Doesn't that sound like a staging? The intelligence service declared the guy dead just based on this video. And it's not even the original, it's an edited copy. Taejoon confessed. They found a body wearing a suicide vest. It was so mutilated that it was simply impossible to examine the body, except that Dewey Lee's military badge was on the body. That's why they assumed it was him. At that moment, Taejoon became Hana Lee's accomplice. She asked him to stop spying on her, and then the girl would pretend to believe the guy's words. She ordered him to tell his superiors that Hana Lee hadn't crossed the threshold of Dewey Lee's apartment since last night. Taejoon only remained silent. He couldn't even object. That's fine. It was Eunseong Yoo's turn. What a heartbreaking betrayal, except that it was too early to talk about it. They would wait and see how this story ended. Was Hana Lee really going to move out right now? Logan gave her the coordinates for the safe house. He said the Cambodian syndicate would probably head there, to lay low until further instructions. Giulio Parenti is going to show up. He's been robbed after all. Hana Lee decided to get to the scene before they did. They had the advantage, and the sly fox was quite confident. He only had one question for her. Did the girl have a lover? He was just curious. Unfortunately for him, yes, and he was right in front of Eunseong Yoo. Well, he'd have to back off before he got another scolding. The man hoped she would be okay. This was fun. What a pity. Another Valentine's hideout, where apparently the guys had been recently. They even had weapons ready for her. What had that asshole, Dewey Lee, gotten his big sister into? But it seems like everything was ready now. Couldn't he give her at least one more sign that he was alive? And so the days went by, and Logan kept wondering about the execution of the plan. So far, things had been quiet around here, and surprisingly, Hana Lee was relaxed. It's kinda weird. The girl wanted to ask him something. The question was regarding Eunseong Yoo. Was that guy really a gang member? He wasn't wearing a badge or anything that would let her know that he was one of them. Logan refused to comment on it in any way because Liu was a complicated guy. This was the first time Hana Lee had heard the name from him. Edward Liu, that's his American name. Logan assumed he had already arrived. The guy was definitely not as simple as he seemed. Didn't they teach him how to knock? Why had he even come here uninvited? The girl peppered him with questions, but his answers were somewhat childish. Eunseong Yoo thought that Hana Lee would be bored here, except he came here because he had a personal matter to her. The guy had some kind of mesa problem. This is a crime syndicate that Hana Lee should take a good look at and that ruled the entire country. It wasn't enough for them to just steal from the Sicilian mafia. They also had a man finish them off. What role did Eunseong Yoo play in all of this? And what did Logan mean when he said that? Lou interrupted the flow of her thought and told her not to be afraid because he wouldn't interrupt her. The girl would take over Giulio Parenti, and the man would take care of Mesa as planned. Everything was perfectly simple, but Hana Lee suddenly grabbed him by the collar and said that Eunseong Yoo was not a member of Valentine's Day. Who even said that? The guy said he would only help her. Or while Hana Lee was in Cambodia. Did she really forget? Who was he working for? Lou was about to confess, but they were interrupted by a phone call from Logan. Mesa was on its way. They'd be there in 3 hours. They numbered 40 men, and all were heavily armed. 1 trailer, 2 containers, and 6 trucks. Giulio Parenti was also aware of their movements and had already moved out after them. Will Hana Lee be able to handle it? And how did it all turn out like this? Just an hour ago, the protagonist couldn't have imagined how things would end. That's when they decided they couldn't fight them in the open. So they had to sneak into the trailer. To do this, Hana Lee was going to puncture the tires of the truck that would drive in front of it. Did the girl really want to delay the whole group until Parenti caught up with them? No. The first step would be to blow up the world when the Mesa showed up. The second step would be to sneak into the trailer while chaos ensues. And step 3 is to wait for Giulio Parenti to show up. The protagonist wanted to do everything as quietly as possible so as not to give herself away, which means she just needed to buy time to get into the trailer. Well, they had to try. Hana Lee seemed to like Eunseong Yoo a lot more than he thought. That sounded pretty old-fashioned. Get ready. Target number 1 was 3 minutes away from arriving. Target number 2 had been located. 5 crossovers 25 minutes away from target number 1. Giulio Parenti was with them. 1 minute to go. 20 seconds, 10 seconds, 5, and here they are. The car had hit a mine. There were people inside the trailer, and Hana Lee was in action. The first 4 targets didn't even have time to do anything, but 11 hours behind Hana Lee was the 5th. Lou got there just in time. How much he cared for his countrywoman. Target number 2 was 5 minutes away. They were traveling at a high speed, so Eunseong Yoo expected a collision. Were they really going to ram them? Who even steals goods without even checking them? Whose voice was that? The person was indignant because it belonged to someone very serious. It was Giulio Parenti. If the man had known everything in advance, he would never have signed up for this. The protagonist noticed that everything sounded as if the criminals didn't know who they were stealing from in the first place. A confrontation was inevitable. Unfortunately, Hana Lee was injured. She had prepared her weapon when the door opened. Her hand trembled under the weight of the gun, but the opponent wasn't afraid. He did not care. He was eagerly waiting for death to come for him. Except that the girl's attention had shifted to the man behind him. The gray-haired man asked what Giulio Parenti was going to do with her. He wondered if she would be of any use to him. Was that all? Hana Lee hugged herself bound to a chair, and she had good reflexes, as Giulio Parenti pointed out. The guy figured the girl was waiting for him inside the trailer on purpose. As it turned out, that was true. And before she was about to respond, Hana Lee asked him to take off his clothes. He didn't think the girl would stay in her things after her bath, did he? Her impertinent language infuriated her. Who said she was even going to get out of here alive? She wasn't flirting, was she? No way. Hana Lee was even willing to bet that she would be the one he would want in the end. But Giulio Parenti decided to speak differently. If this was what the girl really wanted, then she should have gotten used to this kind of thing sooner. Disagree? And he still didn't understand her. And then that man burst in. I demanded an explanation of what these two were doing here. I thought the mob head would finish with the girl as soon as possible. So why was he stalling? Giulio Parenti was sure that Hana Lee was going to hurt him. She had simply distracted him, and the man had unknowingly succumbed to the provocation. Again, that phrase had a hidden message which the man with the scarred face apologized for. What were they even talking about? The protagonist didn't really understand Italian, but by the feel of it, something strange was going on here, which meant she needed to get her hands free and fast. Anyway, the man asked to take care of everything himself. He promised to do it as carefully as possible, but Giulio Parenti forbade it. He was instructed to report yesterday's incident. Fortunately, Hana Lee was quicker. She was no longer the hostage. The mobs had noticed that they had screwed up a bit by tying the girl up. Except she would still get out. She needed to talk to him. Suddenly, the protagonist started hearing footsteps. She explained that nothing would be able to stop her until she managed to realize what she had planned. So the girl was looking for a meeting with him. It was part of her plan, and now everything was going the way she wanted it to. And what did Hana Lee want from Giulio Parenti? Help. If he did that, the girl would find whoever was pretending to be him. The cleanup team wondered what they should do with the bodies, and Eunseong Yoo pulled out a couple of bills and ordered them to dispose of them. It's just a bunch of criminals anyway. Giulio Ragnetti and his gang took the crate of weapons and the trailer of illegal substances. The last thing that needed to be taken care of now was Liu walked over to one of the bodies and pulled out his phone, unlocking it, and arrived later than Eunseong Yoo had expected. Taejun. The man hadn't seen him since the day Hana Lee gave him a good kicking. Doi Lee's co-worker seemed to be doing fine. And by the way, why didn't he say earlier that Hana Lee and Doi Lee were twins? It only became important now. Liu was demanding more information about his new acquaintance. As Taejun explained, the girl was just an ordinary civilian, nothing more. Doi Lee was her only living relative, so the girl can't accept his loss and even came here. Now the decision was up to Liu, so Taejun had to listen carefully. He needed to prove his usefulness as quickly as possible before they got rid of him. Was he really interested in her? Of course, Hana Lee is an attractive woman, which is why Eunseong Yoo wished to adjust his plans slightly. So the main character was going to catch that guy, pretending to be Giulio Parenti. It seems like it was a little late for that now. That guy from the Mesa had already met his end, except the girl's brother was keeping tabs on the imposter. So if the Mafia's head helps, they'll both find out who's behind it. Rumor had it that the man had given the order to attack a Korean intelligence agent, which just so happened to be Doi Lee. But would he be alive if that was the case? That was the reason why Hana Lee was standing here. She wanted to make sure Giulio Parenti hadn't destroyed him. The protagonist was counting on being able to get the attention of the head of the Mafia with this story. If she could convince him that she could be useful, then the goal would be accomplished. Except Giulio Parenti decided to play her game. That's what she wanted, wasn't it? The man suggested a little break, so Romano brought a glass of red and asked to let Lorenzo go. Did they really think Hana Lee would drink that? But Giulio Parenti began to talk about some distrust, because the initiative came from her side. They definitely put something in it. Except something told me that those guys didn't want Hana Lee dead. And she was right. The doctor should be here in 30 minutes, so the girl will get the proper treatment. Giulio Parenti ordered not to leave a single scratch on her body. There was darkness everywhere, but the girl couldn't just let it go. She had to remember this nightmare well. They would do to her what she had done to him, for all the pain he had to endure. The man will make sure that Hana Lee suffers as much as he did. Suddenly, the protagonist woke up. Covered in sweat, she looked around. Whose room is this? Hardly realized that she had been given sleeping pills. She had even had all her wounds treated. What a disgusting nightmare. How she wished she could erase those horrible memories from her mind. Going back to when Hana Lee was a Valentine's Day agent, there was one man who had gone to jail because of it. During his 7-month incarceration, gangsters hunted down and massacred his entire family. The man cursed the protagonist, promising revenge. Back then, her first reaction was a contemptuous smile. But time passed, and she became increasingly uncomfortable. When it was really bad, and the girl always ran to Doi Lee to make sure he was alright. Later, Hana Lee heard that the man was involved in some sort of showdown, after which he met his end. It was the first time a girl had ever rejoiced over someone's death. A horrible experience that made her feel that her humanity had given a slack. A moment of disappointment she didn't want to repeat. Now everything was normal, and she could stop thinking about it. Hana Lee would definitely save Doi Lee. That's what she should focus on. But first, she had to get some food and then think of another way to convince Parenti. He threw away her clothes. What a pervert. She'd known he'd be difficult to deal with, but she'd never expected him to be so crazy. It didn't look like Giulio Parenti was ready to accept her offer, so she met with Lorenzo and apologized. There must be some way to win him over. With luck, some information could be extracted from the man. The girl promised to be a model hostage, but she shouldn't expect much. Who was she anyway? Lorenzo turned on the microphone when Hana Lee admitted that she used to be in the special forces and was now unemployed. Say was just talking about it. It was a girl that Hana Lee looked a lot like in appearance.